Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. A major development in the driver market for next season. Sergio Perez's recent performances have far from impressed Red Bull bosses. It seems more likely than ever that he's going to be out of that car alongside Max Verstappen next season. That leaves an opportunity within the Red Bull family somewhere, either at RB or potentially in the main Red Bull seat. Tsunoda, Lawson, Hadjar, they are Red Bull's candidates, but could someone from outside the fold actually be a great target? Williams are trying to find Colapinto a spot on the grid next season. Does Red Bull make way too much sense given his very impressive debut over these last few rounds? Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. First of all, Kimi Antonelli back in the Mercedes. Of course, last time he was in the Mercedes, it didn't exactly go to plan. He was purple in the first practice in Monza. And then he was in the wall. So he got about, 5 laps, did he? A couple of fast runs before he was in the wall. Of course, it was rather controversial at the time. But yes, he will be in Hamilton's W15 this time. Of course, he was in Russell's the time before that he crashed. So Lewis will certainly be saying, all right, take it easy this time. Build up a little bit. Let's not break the car. Because the reality is, Mercedes don't have that many upgrade packages to go around. They had to start Russell from the pit lane because they had to revert the upgrade package on his car back to the Singapore spec because they didn't have enough replacement parts. That is likely still to be true this weekend in Mexico because it's a brand new Grand Prix 1 weekend after the previous one. No time to send some of the parts back for repairs to the UK and get them back to Mexico, to our understanding. But we also believe that the upgrades Mercedes brought are effectively the final ones of the season. I think Mercedes are confident they can, let's just say, optimize those upgrades they brought, but clearly they didn't always work as intended. It was another Mercedes classic this weekend when they started off looking pretty bad in the first practice session. Hamilton was spinning it around. Then they got really good out of nowhere, and both cars had pace to be on pole. Probably should have been on pole if you think about it, given that Hamilton's lap was significantly up on Russell's before the yellow flag happens because of Colapinto's spin. And then in the sprints, they were nowhere for pace. And then in quali in the race, they were nowhere for pace. So Mercedes are just so confused why their car is nowhere. Toto says they're kind of completely lost again in terms of understanding why things didn't go to plan. And I'm sure Hamilton is sitting there thinking, well, you know what, after a roller coaster season, he did make the correct decision to go to Ferrari. It may not work out, but I think there's really no doubts that Hamilton has made the right call. Whether, of course, Ferrari are good enough in the upcoming years to deliver championships, that is still another question. McLaren, though, do have further upgrades planned for the next 2 rounds in a row. So in Mexico and then in Brazil, they will bring new parts to their cars. As we said yesterday, McLaren believe that race in Austin was going to be their weakest track for a very long time to come. They think that every track from now on is going to be stronger for them. And if Lando can win the races, then he can win the championship. The reality is, it's not like it's just Lando versus Max, 1-2. Ferrari are well in the mix. And I think Ferrari are probably going to save Max Verstappen's championship in many ways this season. Interestingly, though, on McLaren, we know that, of course, their rear wing, the extra flexibility that it had on the rear and the front wing, apparently the clampdown on that, on the rear wing, has affected some other rivals as well with the flexibility of their wings. There was an interesting piece, though, on the front wing elasticity. We know that for the rear wings, they said, all right, guys, let's stop doing this. You guys can see how the edges were flexing up here further than they should have been able to, but we talked about that drama a while ago. Red Bull complained about it to the FIA, they got it shut down, but the front wing flexibility has also been another key talking point, and the FIA for the front wings have said, all right, guys, well, we're not going to do anything about it this year. So as a result, teams that weren't exploiting this flexibility, such as Red Bull, but also Ferrari, most crucially, they have brought changes to their wings, which allow them to be more flexible, maybe not even inside the regulations. Well, technically in the regs, because at a static test, they'll be fine. At speed, they likely deform more than they should, but if the FIA can't test it, then are you really cheating? That is effectively McLaren's argument, but that is seemingly what Ferrari have done. So they've brought a new front wing design to Austin. It was the same design as in Singapore, but they made it out of new composite parts. So technically Ferrari had no upgrades, because if there were no aerodynamic changes, then it's not considered to be an upgrade. But actually Ferrari did bring some tweaks to Austin. Their front wing was more flexible in Austin than it was before, even though it was aerodynamically identical. And apparently the base of the car, so the chassis, the stability of it is incredibly strong, which gives the engineers lots of freedom. So, and apparently, according to the Formula Uno podcast they came out out with, and these were kind of some of the highlights of it, that this French fan account put together today. They had a pace advantage in Austin of something like 3 to 4 tenths of a second, and in race trim they were the fastest car through the first couple of corners, and the drivers were very happy about this new flexible front wing basically that they're allowed to get away with, because that's what the other teams have done. There's also talk that in Mexico it is a track that should suit the SF24 as well. Now, as we've said before, the turbocharger at altitude on the Ferrari engine has not historically been the strongest. We'll see if they can find a solution around that this weekend. But in terms of pure track characteristics, it should be a good one for the Ferrari, and their car now is just getting ever better. I mean, yeah, the race pace advantage they had on their rivals was pretty staggering, actually, at Austin this weekend. And, well, if that's set to continue, Lando has basically no chance to score enough points to overtake Max, even if Max falls off, which is of course unlikely because it's Max. But let's talk about the situation alongside Max in that Red Bull racing car for next season. Checo Perez, sure, his father's going to say he's going to be a world champion. World Constructors Champion? Sure, that's already happened. Not going to happen though this year. World Drivers Champion, and let's be realistic here. But Red Bull are not deciding yet on Perez. They are apparently going to decide at the end of the season, but I think it's quite likely they will make some decision before then. Now, of course, we do know Perez has serious backing from backers in Mexico and South America in general. You may well argue that another South American driver could be very popular and also provide some potential serious sponsor backing. There is therefore another candidate that you guys know that I'm thinking about here, as we shall discuss in a second. But the reality is Perez's results haven't been good enough. Helmut Marko has been very blunt on this and says, look, Perez may have a contract, but F1 is a meritocracy, which is true, and I wish it was more true. Unfortunately, we know that it's not always fully true, and even the rumour has it that Red Bull only kept Perez mid-season when they could have axed him was because there was some serious money from Mexican backers saying, look, we want Perez still in the car, and we certainly want him to compete still at the Mexican Grand Prix. Perez, of course, said a couple of weeks ago on Twitter, I ain't leaving, I ain't going anywhere. But that's his decision, not necessarily Red Bull's decision. And we know that they kept Daniel Ricciardo very much so in the dark about his future until he started to find out, it seems like, through the media on the weekends, that would prove to be his last in Formula 1. And as Marko says, if the performance is not right, even contracts are useless, right? And Christian Horner has actually kind of taken Helmut Marko's line on this lately as well, and has pretty much implied that, yeah, if Perez doesn't deliver and he's still not delivering, the performance will result in his axing from the team. To be fair to Perez, this weekend, he says, I don't know if the team say, but he says, which I imagine is true, but, I don't know to what extent this is true, had fewer upgrades than Max did. The argument was that Max had the full upgrade package, Perez didn't have the whole lot. Maybe he had some of it, maybe he had none of it, I'm not really sure. Perez said, though, he didn't have the full set. So that explains the performance delta in part, but not really enough, especially when Tsunoda, knocked him out at qualifying earlier on the weekends. And then while Yuki didn't have the greatest weekends on a pure results perspective, he was battling hard with Perez and defending very successfully from Perez for multiple laps in a far weaker car. And Liam Lawson, another potential candidate for that drive next season, had a great weekend, certainly on the Sunday, having a great one-stop, hard to medium, obviously making it work from P19 on the grid after an engine penalty all the way up to score a couple of points. And Helmut Marko was asked the question as well, are you giving Tsunoda a test in Abu Dhabi, as was the rumour that we talked about yesterday? And Marko says, we have some plans for Abu Dhabi, yes, but we have various drivers. We have Isaac Hadjar, we have Liam Lawson now, and he says even now we have Liam, kind of implying as well that he's now a real contender after what we saw over the last couple of days. But there's another name that we have to keep in mind in these conversations, and that's Franco Colapinto, right? So James Vowles is at Williams, he's obviously the team boss, and you could argue, and some would argue this, and maybe understandably so, but actually Vowles should say, you know what, Alex, as in Alex Albon, we're going to go with Colapinto instead. That's not going to happen. Alex Albon is still the number one driver, and we'll see over a larger sample size what that starts to look like. But of course, this weekend, again, Colapinto was the one delivering the really impressive performances. Now, Williams want to keep him as part of Williams. They want him to get a drive somewhere else, and I kind of feel like he has to be honest, right? I mean, his performance has been nothing short of stellar. He wasn't a name that was massively at the top of mind when it came came to rookie junior talent in Formula 2. He was in the conversation, but I didn't expect him to be anywhere near this good. And it's not just like he's fast. He doesn't crash, which is obviously a big deal, and I'm sure the Williams mechanics are like absolutely buzzing on that side of the garage. And like, okay, he's had a couple of incidents, but you know, realistically, he's done a great job keeping it out of the wall. Circuit like Singapore is not easy, right? Austin's not an easy track either, and sure, he overstepped the mark in quali, he spun out, obviously that affected Hamilton's lap, but I'm not like Williams are going to care about that, and he still did a great job getting into Q3 in, of course, the sprint qualifying session that he did earlier in the weekend. So he's fast, he doesn't crash, pretty good racecraft as well, like an aggressive driver, which you want. I mean, Alex Albon was in Singapore, was like, oh my God, I can't believe Franco sent it down the inside of turn 1. And it's just because maybe Alex's other teammates, apart from Max, they don't do stuff like that. Colapinto does. And it was a clean and fair move. Aggressive, sure, but do you not want an aggressive driver? Like, you know, if you're not an aggressive driver, you're not going to be a driver capable of winning championships, is the reality of it. And that's the argument about Alex Albon, is that he's too soft, right, from like a driving and also from a character perspective. And I don't know, we haven't really seen much to criticise Alex Albon on over the last couple of years, because he's been waxing terrible drivers. Nicholas Latifi, you know, Logan Sargent, it's been bad. Like, he had the Latifi tax and the Sargent tax of being like, well, we don't really know how good Albon is. Now Colapinto's alongside him, all of a sudden people are saying, wow, Albon's crazy overrated, Sainz is going to destroy him next year, and on this evidence, I wouldn't necessarily bet against that. So ideally, for that medium term, Williams still want to keep Colapinto around, and therefore they're shopping him around as a potential option for other teams. Sauber, on paper, made the most sense, maybe still does. They still need a driver. They have Nico Hülkenberg next year, it's going to become Audi. They could keep Bottas, they could potentially sign Zhou again, but that's not going to happen. Or they could get Colapinto or someone like Gabriel Bortoleto. But I think Bortoleto, according to some rumours, remains one of the heavy favourites. Of course, a driver with maybe a not dissimilar profile than Colapinto. He's a McLaren junior, doing well, of course, actually I think leading technically right now the Formula 2 Championship. Some good luck has gone his way for that to happen, but nonetheless, he is technically in that position. So Bortoleto's now an option for Sauber, and maybe Colapinto is, maybe he's less likely. The option that makes loads of sense, though, is potentially Colapinto to the Red Bull family in some capacity. And this has been a big rumour emerging today. And as people are saying in the replies, you know, there's likes of Yumi Iwasa, there is Isaac Hadjar, there's Liam Lawson, there's other candidates. But the latest rumour is that Colapinto is very much in the conversation to join VCARB, RB, Visa Cash App Racing Bulls, whatever, you guys know what they're called. I'll still call them AlphaTauri sometimes. With one of Lawson or Tsunoda getting promoted, potentially Lawson, as it currently looks, at least after round 1 of the Tsunoda-Lawson fight, you're probably going to give it in Liam Lawson's way. And also, for whatever reason, Red Bull just don't rate Tsunoda as highly as maybe they should, with Checo then losing out. I mean, Perez gone just seems almost inevitable, and Red Bull are desperate for some good talent, obviously, in their junior program. They haven't really had it. They've got the likes of Arvin Lindblad, a talented junior, I think he's 16, 17 years of age, just done great in Formula 3, going to move to Formula 2 next season with Red Bull Racing. So, well, not technically Red Bull Racing, but you know what I mean, Red Bull liveried car, that type of stuff, down there in Formula 2. And they have had options, right? But the reality is the junior program of Red Bull hasn't really delivered that much over the last few years. And Red Bull admitted that certainly since Max Verstappen, they now need to be more willing to go outside of their own family to find other drivers. And as people are mentioning as well, what if Colapinto just gets the main seat? Like, is he better than Liam Lawson and Yuki Tsunoda? Arguably. I don't know the answer to that question yet. The sample size isn't big enough. But there are indications that he could be. And the other factor is with Colapinto that he's incredibly popular and charismatic and entertaining, right? I mean, this guy, his post-race interviews are hilarious. The way that he speaks is great entertainment value. And even Williams, I think, have said, man, we need to get this guy to shut up sometimes. Like, he speaks too much. He's, you know, he rides the line of what's like PR and what's not PR and what's a PC as well and not PC, right, in terms of, you know, whether you should say something in a certain way or whether you shouldn't. Colapinto doesn't really care. And he's one of these very entertaining guys to have on the grid, and he's not just entertaining off the track, but on it as well. And he's massively popular with his, you know, countrymen in Argentina and just in that region in general. I'm sure that Brazil, Sao Paulo, is going to be pretty mega with support for Franco Colapinto there. So if you are to replace Perez, a guy like Colapinto, South American driver, just makes so much sense to bring him into the team. And his results, look, he's 18th in the championship, but he's had 4 rounds. He's had one so that his qualifying positions have been 8th, 12th, 15th, and 18th, and he's finished 8th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. So very consistent. I mean, his average finishing position is, I think, like top 10 of the entire grid this season. That's how consistent he's been over these last couple of rounds. And of course, if you look at it from an entire season perspective as well, we'll go to 2024, you'll see the following. Sergio Perez, after the Red Bull was no longer a rocket ship, has scored 4-0-0-4-7-0-6-7-8-4-0-1-6 points. And that's not great in a Red Bull. Whereas, and that of course even includes the sprint, I guess, for Perez this weekend. Whereas for Colapinto, sure, he's 18th in the championship. He's certainly still behind Ollie Behrman, but he scored 4 and 1, which is commendable. I mean, in a Williams, there's no doubt about it. And there's a genuine chance that Colapinto ends up ahead of Albon in the championship. It's unlikely. There's only a few rounds to go. But the Williams is pretty good right now. And I mean, it's 7 points separates Colapinto and Albon. If Colapinto has a good couple of more performances, it's not implausible that he could actually overtake Albon in the Drivers' Championship, which would be quite the statement. So I feel like he's got to get a drive somewhere. And the latest rumour is that this is Red Bull's solution. They don't have a great solution to the Red Bull Perez problem, but this might be the answer. They bring in Lawson or Colapinto to the Red Bull Racing seat. It's probably not going to be Yuki, but, that is what it is. And if Lawson keeps doing what he did in Kota for the next few rounds, that's probably what they do. If he doesn't, maybe Colapinto just straight up gets the Red Bull drive. I mean, I don't think it would be entirely implausible. It's the type of thing that you would imagine Red Bull might quite like to do. And of course, as we say, Joe Saward says the same thing, where he says, talking about Perez, let us wait till the end of the year to see what happens in 25. But Lawson did a super job in Austin, and the joy the Red Bull folks seem to me to be related to the fact that perhaps they feel like they found a solution to their problem. They may have also found a solution to the vacancy that a departing Lawson might create at VCARB, as Franco Colapinto has no drive, has a vacancy the team's committed elsewhere. The word is that Red Bull are now sniffing around Franco. Sainz and Albon are due to stay at Williams until at least 2026. There's no space at the moment for Colapinto. Red Bull needs a strong youngster. So it just makes a lot of sense. And another positive for Colapinto that Red Bull and certainly VCARB may appreciate, because one of Yuki's weaknesses compared to, let's say, a guy like Daniel Ricciardo was having good technical feedback. The understanding is that Tsunoda isn't quite as strong on that aspect than other drivers. And it seems like Colapinto, even from his Formula 2 days, but now certainly in Formula 1, has a great understanding of the technicalities behind Formula 1 and how to help the team improve the car. And I think his race engineer basically said, Franco is excellent at this and he's nowhere near as good as he can be yet. He can get even better. So the key takeaway is that not only does Alex Albon have to worry about his own performance and reputation alongside the likes of Colapinto, but it's absolutely true that the likes of Sergio Perez and others at Red Bull have to be seriously concerned about whether their drive is actually on the edge of getting axed or not. But very much into your thoughts as ever in the comment section below. Just some more controversial power rankings here to close out the video as ever from Formula 1. You can debate the Verstappen numbers. All of these numbers, I think, are probably somewhat debatable. I know there was lots of talk about Russell, though, because obviously he had a phenomenal comeback drive on the Sunday up to P6. But at the same time, was it his fault that the car went in the wall that put him in that position? Sure, I mean, it's probably the car's fault on some level, but, Russell was obviously partially responsible, so that's kind of why I think you get this right. A phenomenal Sunday drive, great, sure, but if you put yourself in that difficult position, then they're going to rank you down. Whether you think that's fair or not is another debate, I suppose, but very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.